When you think of the best credit card setup, what is probably going to come to mind is going to be something like the Chase Trifecta or something like the AMEX Trifecta. But there's a super underrated credit card setup that is going to give you fantastic point multipliers, as well as a bunch of travel benefits that are going to completely offset the annual fee. And that setup is going to consist of the Capital One Venture X and Capital One Savor One, forming the Capital One duo. So in this video, I'm going to go through everything you need to know about the Capital One duo, including my takeaways from the setup. Plus, you're going to want to make sure that you stay until the end of this video, because I'll also go through some specific reasons for why you should choose the Capital One duo over some other setups that are out there like the Chase Trifecta. And then I'll also discuss some reasons for why the Capital One duo might not be for you, because even though this setup is super valuable, there are going to be some drawbacks to the Capital One duo as well. But if we jump right into it, let's start by discussing the annual fees and welcome bonuses for these two credit cards that make up the Capital One duo. The first component of the Capital One duo is going to be the Capital One Savor One, which does not have an annual fee, but despite that, it's going to give you the opportunity to earn $200 cash back if you're able to spend $500 or more in the first 3 months of having the card. And then the second component of the Capital One duo is going to be the Capital One Venture X, which is a luxury travel card, and so it does have an annual fee of $395, but you will have the opportunity to earn 75,000 Capital One miles if you're able to spend $4,000 or more in the first 3 months of having the card. The best part about these welcome bonuses is that you're going to be able to combine all the cash back and Capital One miles that you earn into one bucket, which is going to allow you to have the ability to get the highest possible redemption value. And I am going to discuss all of those redemption options right here in a second. But first, the next thing that I want to discuss about the Capital One duo is going to be the point multipliers, because despite being a simple setup of only 2 credit cards, with one of those cards not even having an annual fee, the Capital One duo is going to get some fantastic point multipliers. The no annual fee Capital One Savor One has point multipliers of 10x back on Uber and Uber Eats, 8x back on Capital One Entertainment, 5x back on hotels and car rentals booked through the Capital One travel portal, 3x back on dining, entertainment, popular streaming services, and grocery stores, and then 1x back on everything else. Then the higher tier Venture X card is going to give you point multipliers of 10x back on hotels and car rentals booked through the Capital One travel portal, 5x back on flights booked through the Capital One travel portal, and then 2x back on everything else. So if we put these two cards side by side, in order to take a closer look at their point multipliers, we can see that even though the Capital One duo has a layer of simplicity, since it's only a 2-card setup, the Capital One duo is still going to get you exposure for a lot of the major spending categories, with the Venture X covering the travel-related spending categories, with those elevated multipliers for hotels, car rentals, and flights, and then the Savor One covering a lot of these spending categories that you would need for day-to-day purchases, like dining, entertainment, and grocery stores, plus getting you those high multipliers in the Uber and Capital One Entertainment categories as well. Plus, this 2-card setup is also going to give you that 2x back in everything else category, which means that you could even use the Venture X as your catch-all credit card as well. Really, the only main multiplier that would be missing with the Capital One duo would be a multiplier for gas stations. So if you do spend a good amount of money in that category, then it would be a good idea to, in addition to the Capital One duo, have another credit card that can get you a higher multiplier for gas stations. Next up, this 2-card setup does have a total annual fee of $395, which is going to be from that Venture X card. But the nice thing is, unlike most premium travel credit cards, the Venture X card has a really simple way to actually completely offset that annual fee with the credits that you get on that card. First, the Capital One Venture X is going to give you a $300 annual travel credit, which is basically going to take the form and a $300 statement credit for any travel bookings that you make through the Capital One travel portal. And you might be thinking, well, a lot of travel portals inflate their prices, so that travel credit actually isn't that great. But the thing is, Capital One does have a price match guarantee, which is super nice. And basically what that means is that if you book some travel through the Capital One travel portal, and then within 24 hours you go to another travel site and you find that exact same booking at a cheaper price, Capital One will actually refund you the difference between those two prices, which essentially allows you to lock in the best travel deals through the portal. Additionally, the Venture X card is going to give you 10,000 bonus miles on your card member anniversary every single year, which is going to be worth at least $100 in value if you can use those miles to offset a travel purchase. So if you add up that $300 annual travel credit with the $100 in value that you get from the 10,000 bonus miles, then you get a total value of $400, which is going to be more than the annual fee on this 2-card setup every year, which basically allows you to use the Capital One Duo as a keeper type setup. But despite how good the Capital One Duo already looks, that's not all that you'll get, because you'll also get some additional benefits as well, such as Capital One Lounge access with the Venture X, an Uber One membership with the X Savor One, and then access to the Capital One Premier Hotel Collection and Hertz President Circle status with the Venture X as well. Next up is arguably going to be the most important aspect on the Capital One Duo, and that is going to be how to take the points that you're already earning and then redeem them for maximum value. I'm mainly going to be discussing the best possible redemption option here, and that is going to be to take all of your Capital One miles and then transfer them out to Capital One's travel partners. The nice thing is you can actually take all of the cash back that you're earning on your Capital One Savor One card and then transfer all of that cash back at a rate of 1 cent in cash back to 1 Capital One mile by leveraging the Venture X card. So as I mentioned earlier, the Savor One card is going to give you a lot of exposure to a lot of major spending categories. So you can take all the cash back that you're earning there and transfer them over to your Venture X card and combine all of those points into one bucket, and then transfer your Capital One miles out to Capital One's travel partners. Capital One does have some fantastic travel partners, and I do just want to give you one example of a specific travel redemption that I plan to do in the future, and that is going to be flying business class from the US to Mexico. My fiance and I do plan to take multiple trips across different areas of Mexico over the next couple of years, and luckily for us, one of Capital One's travel partners is Turkish Airlines. You might be thinking to yourself, like, what? Like, how does Turkish Airlines have anything to do with wanting to go to Mexico? Well, Turkish Airlines is a member of the Star Alliance, which basically means that you can use your Turkish airline miles to book a flight on United Airlines. So basically what you would do here is you would take your Capital One miles, transfer them out to Turkish Airlines, and then use your Turkish airline miles to book a flight that is operated by United Airlines. The reason that this is so valuable is because you can use Turkish airline points to book business class United Airlines for only 15,000 points from the US to Mexico. Since United Airlines business class is typically over $1,100 in cash value, this is an absolute steal because using points for that purchase would basically give you a really high redemption value of 7.3 cents per point. Ultimately, this is just one way that you can leverage travel partners to get really high redemption value for your Capital One miles. And it's a specific redemption that I plan to do, like I said, because I plan to go around different parts of Mexico with my fiance over the next couple of years. Also, as I continue to travel, I do want to make a lot more videos on in-depth travel redemptions that I am personally making, so you can understand how to redeem your miles for fantastic travel redemptions as well. So if you want to see some of those videos in the future, then make sure to subscribe down below so that you don't miss out on those future videos. All right, so now that I've given you a full breakdown on what the most common Capital One Duo setup would look like, let's get into some of my takeaways for this setup. First of all, given how powerful this setup truly is, the Capital One Duo is going to have a really low setup cost of $395, especially when you compare that to the Chase Trifecta with the Sapphire Reserve, which has a total setup cost of $550, or the AMEX Trifecta, which has a total setup cost of $945. My second takeaway for the Capital One Duo is going to be the simplicity, because instead of needing to have a bunch of different credit cards to cover a bunch of different spending categories, the Capital One Duo is going to cover a lot of those spending categories with the fantastic point multipliers, even with just having 2 cards in the setup. And then if we compare the Capital One Venture X, which is a huge factor in the Capital One Duo setup, to some other premium travel credit cards, so like the Chase Sapphire Reserve or AMEX Platinum, the Venture X is the only one of those premium cards that's going to have a specific way for you to completely offset the annual fee, and that's going to be from that $300 travel credit and those 10,000 bonus miles. So now I'm going to get into some specific reasons for why you need the Capital One Duo setup, but then I'll also get into some reasons for why you might want to actually avoid the Capital One Duo, because it's really important to understand both sides of the equation. First things first, you must get the Capital One Duo because you're going to get more value from the credits on this card than the fee alone, which just means that all of the other benefits on this setup are just going to be an added bonus. Next up, if you want to travel internationally, then the Capital One Duo is going to be a great option because unlike a card like the Chase Freedom Unlimited, both components of the Capital One Duo do not have foreign transaction fees, so both the Capital One Savor One and Capital One Venture X would be cards that you could use when you traveled internationally. Next up, if you frequently travel to airport lounges with guests, then this setup is also going to be a great option for you because the Capital One Venture X is going to get you airport lounge access for not just yourself, but also up to 2 guests for every visit. Another huge reason for why you should get the Capital One Duo is if you value simplicity, because instead of needing to mix and match a bunch of different credit cards to cover your main spending categories, the Capital One Duo is going to give you some fantastic point multipliers that can cover a lot of your major spending categories. And even though it's only a 2-card setup, you can also get some additional travel benefits from the setup as well. The Duo is also going to give you a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to leverage the Savor One if you want to prioritize cash back, or leveraging the Venture X if you want to prioritize that travel upside. And then finally, you should get the Capital One Venture X and Capital One Savor One specifically, because Capital One does limit the amount of personal credit cards that you can have to 2. And I think these 2 cards are the very best Capital One credit cards. Plus, they're definitely the best option to complete your Capital One Duo. But like I said earlier, it's important to look at both sides of things. So I'm now going to get into some specific reasons and situations to where you might actually want to avoid the Capital One Duo. The first reason is that even though Capital One has been making some significant improvements to their credit card ecosystem, the Capital One ecosystem is still probably not as good as the ecosystems with other issuers, so like Chase or American Express, in terms of factors like travel partners or customer service. And then in terms of specific situations that you might find yourself in, if you're someone who really values luxury travel benefits, and that's what you're looking for with your credit card setup, then another setup like the AMEX Trifecta is probably going to be more valuable to you than the Capital One Duo. And then if you're on the other side of things and you're just looking for the cheapest option for a credit card setup that's going to give you some travel redemption capabilities, then something like the $95 Chase Trifecta is actually probably going to be a better option than the Capital One Duo. Also, depending on what your credit card journey currently looks like, you definitely want to be strategic and keep in mind the different rules that credit card issuers have. So maybe you're at a point right now where you're prioritizing Chase cards because of the Chase 524 rule. And if that's the case, then the Capital One Duo also probably wouldn't make the most sense. But if you're like most people, then I still think the Capital One Duo is a fantastic setup that's going to be really valuable for the vast majority of people. Since the Capital One Duo covers a lot of major spending categories and gets some additional travel benefits as well, this setup can be used really well by itself. But since if you simply just use the credits, you can completely offset the annual fee, the Capital One Duo can also be paired really well with some other credit card setups, so like the Chase Trifecta or AMEX Trifecta. However, if you want to get the Capital One Duo, then it's going to be really important that you understand all the major changes that Capital One is making to their credit card ecosystem. So go ahead and watch this video next so you can see how Capital One is destroying the competition. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Peace.